Bienvenidos y buenas tardes. Si gusta participar en español, debería estar escuchando traducciones en español en vivo en este momento. O si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, haga clic en el botón Interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione la opción en español. Welcome to our DRAG working group meeting. My name is Jackie Nierenberg. I'm Director of Community Engagement and Transit Partnership. And our speakers tonight will turn on their cameras and introduce themselves. And then I'd like to introduce a special guest who we have in the audience tonight. So I'll start with Lonnie Stern. Lonnie, can you turn on your camera and say hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lonnie Stern, and I'm the Acting Director of Community Engagement at the Austin Transit Partnership.
Thanks, Lonnie. Peter Mullen.
Hi, everybody. Peter Mullen, Chief of Architecture and Urban Design for ATP, Austin Transit Partnership.
Thanks, Peter. Vikram Sinha.
Hi, everybody. Vikram Sinha, Public Involvement Manager, Orange Line. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Caitlin Dalton.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Dalton. I work in the Austin Transportation Department at the City of Austin.
Meg Barrett.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Meg, and I support the team here on the Orange Line.
Thanks, Meg. Isis Hernandez.
Hello, everybody. Isis Hernandez. I am the engineer lead with AECOM, which is a consultant firm for the Orange Line.
Thank you, Isis. And I believe we have Council Member Ann Kitchen in the audience. Council Member, would you like to say a few words? We can open up your mic.
Yes, can you all
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just want to say welcome to everybody. I really appreciate you all holding these meetings. It really gives everyone a chance to understand what's being planned for Project Connect and to weigh in and to let you all know what's important to them. So I appreciate everybody's participation, and I hope you'll participate in all of these and let the team know what you think. Thank you all.
Thank you, Council Member, and thank you for being here. Tonight, we're going to conduct the presentation in two parts. We'll save time for discussion at the end of each section, and we hope to wrap up by 7 p.m. So we'll begin with a brief overview of Project Connect, as we always do, and then we'll share some information about the Orange Line and walk through the current proposed design for the drag. We'll also do an overview of some of the mobility network analysis and end with a deep dive on the latest design. We want to be an interactive discussion, so as we walk through the project, you can pose questions in the Q&A feature and we can discuss them. If we go past 7 o'clock, we can extend till 7:30. So if our discussion is lively and ongoing, we can stretch it a bit. Next slide, please. The Austin region currently has an estimated 2 million people, and that is projected to grow to 4 million by 2040. As such, in 2019, Council approved the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, which aims to keep the number of cars constant while growing our population by an additional 2 million people. You'll see that as we go through the design drawings, this is where policy, quote, rubber meets the road. We are designing to a variety of modes. Project Connect is a transit system expansion that includes a new light rail system, a transit tunnel under downtown that makes everyone's trip faster, an expanded bus system with 4 new Metro Rapid routes, plus 9 new park and rides and 11 pickup neighborhood circulator zones, a transition to a zero emissions fleet to protect our environment. A key way to realize the efficiency of transit is through the primary proposition of the Orange Line. In other words, dedicated transit ways that can move the most people in the least amount of space. This is a rendering of a non-specific street where we could accommodate all modes of mobility. Of course, on Guadalupe, we are very constrained, and therefore we are here tonight to discuss the various design solutions given those constraints. So we are
We
always.
need to advance. Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. We are always grounding ourselves at Project Connect with the 3 tenets of the program. So equity, environment and sustainability, and innovation and technology. And in keeping with the values of the program and our community, we're putting this into practice on the drag. Our aim is to create a high quality mobility experience for all ages and all abilities. And it will be evident in our careful attention to the design and not necessarily always prioritizing the speed of cars, but rather prioritizing getting more people through the corridor safely and efficiently. Here's an overview of the orange line. Looking south on the left and north on the right, the environmental process includes the whole corridor from Slaughter to Tech Ridge. The initial investment includes Stasny to the North Lamar Transit Center. Tonight, we'll be looking primarily at the area around UT West Mall Station and Hemphill Park. A reminder that by the end of this summer, all segments of the Orange Line will have a comparable walkthrough available online. We've done a similar meeting to this one for the St. Ed's to Stasny segment and North Guadalupe. You can see those online by going to the Project Connect website, that's projectconnect.com, get involved. Key milestones for the program through 2023 include the phase we're in currently. By summer, we will be publishing a draft environmental impact statement. Now, many of you know we've recently come to understand that our original cost estimates have gone way up. To recap where we left off at 15% design, we were evaluating 2 design options. Option A, which envisions a light rail with 1 lane of traffic in each direction. Oops, I'm sorry, I'll let you catch up. Okay, option A, which envisions a light rail with 1 lane of traffic in each direction, but shared bike and ped facilities, or option B, a transit mall where no cars are on the drag, but bike and pedestrians have full facilities. I'll now pass this along to Meg Merritt to talk about the mobility evaluation section. Meg, take it away.
Thanks, Jackie. And for those of you viewing, we've got a little bit of a slide delay. So Bill, we're going to maybe go back just a few slides and Peter's gonna give us an overview. Yep, perfect. Yeah, perfect.
So
Thank you.
just to set the context, and these are slides that we talked about when we were when we had a meeting back in December. You know, I think that as we evaluate how to integrate this new, incredibly powerful transit mobility infrastructure into the Guadalupe corridor at the drag. We also recognize that the drag is, one of the iconic places in our city, and it epitomizes and embodies so many of, I think, the things that make Austin Austin, and to give it its character. I mean, the kind of vibrancy, the pedestrian activity, the diversity of activities, opportunities for public art, obviously the University of Texas. I think that, the idea of the drag in many ways right now is a little more powerful than the reality. I think our goal here is how do we use this process to bring as much new life back to the drag as we can, and really enhance the whole experience of this place. So that it's not just a place that people are moving through, but it's a place that people want to be, and they want a destination in and of itself. Go to the next. So, one of the things that's informing this process is also just some analysis of just how the sheer number of pedestrians and cyclists there are on the drag. And we actually worked with the students at the UT, the Cockrell School of Engineering last year to do some pedestrian counts and some analysis of that activity. And the results are quite startling. I mean, if you look at the bars in yellow, those are some of the busiest intersections downtown. But the volumes of pedestrians on the drag they're dwarfed by the volumes of pedestrians at the drag. So it's, I think that we really can't underestimate the importance of that activity, and that we need to design for that activity intentionally. That certainly is not, those numbers are not going to go down over time, certainly as West Campus in particular continues to get built out. So this is some of the data that's really informing our solutions going forward. Next. As Jackie mentioned, previously we were looking at two options. Option A had one lane of general purpose traffic in addition to the light rail and then sidewalks, shared use paths actually on the sides for pedestrians and bicyclists. Next. And then option B, which we called the transit mall scheme, which basically had no general purpose traffic on it and had light rail in the center that could be used for buses as well, and then dedicated bike lanes and sidewalks in this case. And we'll talk about how we've tried to take the best of both of those options and move forward into the design progression. Next. We had some meetings in December, and actually we had a follow-up meeting, I think, in February, and we got some really great feedback. There's a lot of support for creating a place that really focused on pedestrians, and so support for actually removing automobile traffic, taking this place and making it less of a highway and more of a place. I think there was some concern about mixing, pedestrians and cyclists, again, just given the volumes, and so a desire to have separate facilities for bikes and peds. Some legitimate questions about what if we were to pursue an option that removed automobile traffic off of the drag, what would the impacts of that be on the surrounding neighborhoods? And I think these are really important questions and ones that hopefully we'll be able to answer tonight. But obviously that's something that we heard a lot about and we want to be able to answer. And then also a question about how buses would interact on the drag in either option, but particularly in the transit mall option, recognizing that this is one of the biggest destination areas for buses in the current system. We know that bus service to this area is going to continue to be important. Obviously, it will change and evolve over time with the addition of the light rail into the system overall transit network. But obviously, that's something we have to accommodate, or it's important to accommodate into the design. Next. One of the other things we asked about is, what are the characteristics that would make this place, really succeed and thrive as a place, and so what are the amenities that would contribute to that? And the one that I really think, there are lots of different ones that got support: outdoor cafes, good lighting. That's obviously crucial. But the one that really stands out for me is just the need for trees and shade. And that was during a December meeting. I bet if we ask that question now, that number might even go up. I think we're all experiencing how critical that is to making places successful. So that's also something we've sought to incorporate into the design as we've moved it forward. Next. So what we'll be showing tonight is what we're calling an enhanced transit mall. We're calling it option C, and it is kind of a hybrid of options A and B that we reviewed previously. the proposal is to be focused on transit, pedestrians, and cyclists. So removing general purpose traffic from the drag between 22nd and 29th Streets. So, really transformative opportunity for this place. And we've tried to take the elements of the previous options previously reviewed and kind of refine them and enhance them to make this work as well as we can. So we've kind of shifted the alignment of the light rail a little bit to the east so we can get a wider sidewalk on the west, and also a continuous row of street trees. So we've got a kind of a great street style sidewalk on the west next to the retail on the drag. And then we have separated bicycle facilities, and we have what we're calling an option lane, and we'll talk about it. There are different scenarios for how that could be used. There's an option where that option lane could be used for bicycles only. That's option scenario C2. And then there's an option where it's shared with buses. So, and I think this is something that we can study, over time and to really maximize and optimize the operation of that lane. So lots of flexibility built into this new configuration that kind of tries to take the best of both of the previous options previously discussed. The other thing is, this flexibility does build in good, also opportunity for emergency vehicles so that we're covered for the fire department and other special needs. Next. So here you can see those two scenarios side by side, and the color configuration is something that you'll see repeatedly throughout the presentation. So on the left, scenario C1, again, and the physical configuration is the same. It's just a question of how that option lane gets utilized, and therefore how the light rail guideway gets utilized in either scenario. So in scenario C1, and that's marked by that sort of that pinkish color, that option lane is a shared bus bikeway. We'll talk a little bit about precedents for that. And then option C2, again, that's the green, that would be a dedicated bike lane. And in that scenario, buses would share the LRT guideway for this section of the orange line. Next. So now we'll go into, I'm going to pass it to Meg, who's going to talk about, some of the analysis we've talked about regarding traffic and just the mobility through the corridor in general.
Thanks, Peter. So during this section, we will be reviewing some of the evaluation factors that the project team used to better understand the trade-offs of the various design options that Peter walked us through, both qualitative and quantitative. We will go through the analysis in 4 parts. First, we'll discuss the key performance indicator that Jackie introduced earlier, that is person throughput. Next, we'll take a look at how the drag performs today and how traffic may be redistributed throughout the district in the future. Then we'll take a look at data from the traffic study and proposed mitigations. And finally, we'll discuss the future of the drag as a place for the community. One item to note, since option A proposes a lane of auto traffic and options B and C propose no auto traffic, for purposes of the evaluation, B and C were effectively modeled together. So throughout this section, when we compare option A, we compare it to a combo of B, C together. Also, when we use the term no build, we are using shorthand to describe a scenario in 2045 that would pan out if we did nothing. The good news is that we aren't doing nothing. We are building the orange line, but this is like a data control. You can think of it that way. It helps us understand appropriate interventions when we're comparing options. And as a reminder, we will break at the end of the mobility network section for live Q&A. Now I'm going to pass it to Vikram to go through the first component of the traffic study.
Thanks, Meg. So let's dive into how the addition of light rail transit and removing auto traffic on the drag dramatically increases person throughput and efficiency of the corridor. So here we see 3 options, the no build, the option A and the combination option BC. As you can see, removing auto traffic dramatically increases the throughput of the corridor. So let's take a look at how these designs that Peter walked us through could be different. No build in 2045 would be roughly 6,500 people an hour. However, with the orange line option A or option BC, we see that increase dramatically. And here's a cross section of the area near the West Campus Mall, showing no build traffic currently. And then next slide, please. And this is the throughput with the transit mall. As we saw, the highest efficiency is option B and C. And back to you, Meg.
Great. Thanks, Vikram. Okay, let's talk about the second part of the findings. So the point here and the takeaway in the second component is that a significant amount of current drag auto traffic is through traffic. That is, it does not use the drag or the district as a destination, but rather it's commuter traffic. And the finding here is that commuter traffic can use other major roadways. This animation shows some of the general patterns that were observed during the traffic study. In this first frame, we see a 2045 no build scenario where a lot of the through auto traffic depends on Guadalupe. But next is a scenario modeled in the build option BC where the mode split is rebalanced and auto traffic is better matched to the road network around it, meaning the through traffic uses major roadways while local traffic uses district streets. Next slide. Isis is going to walk us through a major finding from the traffic study along with our partners at the city. And that is that any resulting changes to local traffic can be mitigated through improvements to local street network. Taking traffic off the drag is comparable for drivers to keeping one lane on the drag. I'll pass it now to Caitlin, who can walk us through some of the early findings from the city.
Great, thanks. So as Meg mentioned, I'll be providing a brief overview of the near-term improvements that the city has planned in the West Campus area. I'm sure most of us in this meeting know that West Campus is experiencing growth and increased density at a rate that our current roads aren't designed for. And while there's no perfect solution to address this, we need to do something. So one of the improvements that the city will be making is converting Nueces Street between 24th and Guadalupe to accommodate two-way traffic. This conversion was planned before the vote for Project Connect and will help us address safety and mobility concerns in the area. Additionally, as Project Connect begins construction in the future, the need for alternate ways for traffic to navigate through West Campus will increase. And this change to Nueces Street will help address that too. In addition to the two-way conversion, the city will also be adding bulb outs at Nueces and Fruth Streets to improve pedestrian crossings at those locations. We'll be converting Fruth Street north of Guadalupe to one-way northbound. We'll be upgrading sidewalks and crossings in the area to make them ADA compliant. And we'll be adding a new traffic signal at the intersection of Guadalupe and Nueces Street. Some of those improvements that I just mentioned will begin construction over the next few weeks. And our hope is to implement the two-way conversion on Nueces Street over the winter break, but timing for that change may vary. So with that, I'll pass the mic over to Isis to discuss some of the longer term improvements planned as part of Project Connect.
Thank you, Caitlin. Our study area considered a section that included to the south 15th Street, to the north, the Triangle, to the west, Lamar, and to the east, Guadalupe Street. Now that we have the area clear, let's talk about some of the early findings that the study in the traffic network had. We know
I
that,
think you're just the slides. Yeah, need to get advanced. There you go. You might want to just direct the slides to advance so that they're timed with your comments. Thanks.
sure. So this is, I'm gonna go through slide 34, in case that helps. We know that the more we connect the grid, the better it is. And so because of that, we are assuming certain modifications to the network as the start of the analysis. These are the Din-Keaton is going to be extended to San Antonio all the way, Din-Keaton is going to be extended all the way to San Antonio, and that the noises in San Antonio is going to be realigned to have a continuous one road all the way from MLK to 29th Street. Now that we have that covered, this slide is talking about some of our analysis, right? So the team analyzed 64 intersections in the study area in order to compare the no build to the option B. Option B is also option C, as Meg explained. The analysis also compared option A against option B or C. Since auto traffic in option B is the same as option C, they're modeled together, right? As any design option, both of these design options eliminate the network vehicles from the network. On the 64 intersections, 12 intersections were needed to be improved for option B and C, and 5 intersections needed to be improved for option A. These improvements are being proposed so that the intersections perform comparable or better than having no project at all. Some examples of the improvements are signalization, lane modifications, or both of these improvements in one intersection. These designs will require refinement in subsequent phases of the design. We can go to the next slide. This map shows the intersection all the intersections needing improvements corresponding for each option. The orange is for the intersections for option B and C, and the purples are for option A. The table to the right shows the delay for the 12 intersections that I mentioned before. The no build column shows the total delay vehicles will have if the project is not built. The column to the right shows the changes in delay each option would have after the determined intersections are improved. So if you can see, we have option A right next to no build and then option B or C. As you can see, there is no obvious preferred option based on the delay changes. We have some intersections improving, shown in green, and both options have those intersections. So if we go to the next slide, these intersections in B and C perform better than option A, the ones that are highlighted to the very right of your screen. This tells us that before option A and option BC, there's no, between these two options, there's no clear winner. There's no clear winner from a traffic perspective. So Lonnie is gonna try to see what comes next then.
Well, so in a situation like this, thanks Isis, where you don't necessarily see a vast difference between option A and option BC, you have to remind yourself that we've just grounded this part of the discussion on delay for car users. The truth is, the road is used by a lot of people. There are people on their feet, people on their bikes, people in buses, eventually in trains, and also people on scooters, as we all know. And when you look at the ancillary benefits for all users on the street, the story really changes. Next slide, please. So the goal, and one of the goals that was highlighted in previous discussions, was looking at the future of the drag as a place for the community, rather than just a place for cars and traffic. Next slide. Now, I know when I first arrived here in the 90s, I really thought of the drag as a destination, a premier shopping district. The longer that I've lived here, the more I think about tiny sidewalks, no tree cover, and very hot. Having seen people weave in and out of traffic on their bikes between delivery vehicles and cars that are parking, now buses as well. And then gridlock, it's a place you want to avoid during rush hour. And so we're trying to balance those needs and improve the quality of life in this part of town. Next slide. And so we've come up with a vision that is based on the community feedback that we heard from our first several rounds of discussions about the drag. And we're going to go into a lot more detail about it tonight. And so we're going to get to this vision that you see in front of you, where you can see that there's space for people who are walking on bikes, scooters, buses, and trains, and that there's cover there from the elements, that there's real-time arrival information and wayfinding, and a connection to place, and of course, more shade to make it easier to be out on the street. In fact, you can even see in this image that there's some seating and tables out there because, again, during our earlier rounds, we talked about the need for outdoor cafes as a possible use in this area. So as a reminder, we're going to kind of stop here for a little bit, and we're going to open the mics for Q&A about what we've heard so far. And then again, we're going to take a much deeper dive into the actual proposal. So there'll be a second chance to really kick the tires on that. And before we open the mics, I'd like to invite all the people who've presented tonight, and then some of the folks who are in the background who have agreed to be part of Q&A to turn on their cameras and possibly your mics. And also, Bill, if you can drop the slide down just so that way it's a little bit more intimate and we can see who we're talking to, that would be great. And so I think, again, I'm going to go ahead and make it so that way you can raise your hand if you're in the audience and you want to speak. So we'll let that build up for a little bit. And I wanted to start with some of the questions that are out there. And I feel like, let's go straight to the heart of the matter, because I've seen so many comments from folks about Dirty Martins, which, Peter, I'm sure everybody who's on the team has thought about it, but Peter, I think you were interested in talking about this. And I think one of the best ways in which this was said was that, I'm a believer in the importance of public transportation. I think, Evan, that was you. That said, I also believe that cultural preservation needs to be included in any conversation concerning city planning. And so I guess, Peter, what are your thoughts about impacts this project could have on buildings that mean a lot to people in the community, and what happens to those businesses should there be an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Evan, you said it exactly right. And, we couldn't agree more. And, this is part of why we have these meetings and to have this dialogue, is so that we can make sure that we're hearing from the community, about the historic and cultural resources that mean the most to the community. And, do whatever we can, wherever we can, to make sure that we're at least limiting or not impacting those important places and those important cultural resources. Based on the alignment of the orange line, we are struggling to find a way that won't impact Dirty Martins in this case. Again, that's just based on the geometry of the street and some of the limitations in terms of other buildings around the perimeter. There's a residential building directly across the street, and so we're trying also not to impact that. So, these are the things that we're trying to work through. And again, we're not starting construction tomorrow, right? This is the beginning of the design process. Honestly, we don't currently see an option for the alignment that does not impact Dirty Martins, but I honestly think that there's value in this conversation, and that hopefully, there is a future for Dirty Martins somewhere in this community, right? I just want to say we totally understand the impacts on the businesses and the employees who have worked there a long time. And there are processes in place that, this is a highly regulated process where, we will be continuing to engage with the property owner, the business owner, and the employees to make sure that whatever happens, that this is managed with openness and and dialogue. So I think this is going to be a continued conversation. So, and honestly, I really appreciate all of the wellspring of support and interest really that has come up. I mean, these are the kinds of things that bring communities together, and we need to work through a solution together. So.
Well, it's true that, Keep Austin Weird is alive and well here in Austin, Texas. And Peter, I appreciate you bringing up again that, as a team, the decision was made early on that if you have to impact houses or businesses, that you were going to choose the impact to the businesses because, people, it's preferable to work with a business relocation than removing people from their homes. And so in this area on the drag, you really are constrained, and it's a choice between those two. Also, I've lived here long enough to know that many of our iconic businesses move and they keep on trucking. Like Antone's has been at how many different locations? And I remember Bookwoman used to be in a different place, and now it's been at Lamar so long that most of the people on this call don't remember when it used to be in a different location. Or the Cedar Door is no longer on Cedar Street. And so, we have a long history of supporting businesses as they make those transitions. So thanks for addressing that first. This was an interesting question that came up, and I think we're going to address it more in the second half. And I'm not sure if Caitlin or Lee from the city might want to participate in this as well, but it was the bicycle safety question, asking how is bicycle safety handled in a lane that's shared with buses? Since I know we're considering two different options about the shared lane. Did you want to address that a bit, Caitlin?
Sure, I can begin to speak to that, and Lee, feel free to add on. So shared bus bike lanes are designed to standards that are used across the country and used based on guidance from the National Association of City Transportation Officials. So when we're designing these lanes, we design them to operate at fairly low bus speeds. So buses generally don't travel more than 15 miles per hour. They're also designed to prevent passing or leapfrogging between buses and cyclists. So if a bus is in front of a cyclist or vice versa, they're designed so that those users follow, in one in front of the other. And where passing can occur is at bus stops. So we would design the facility to allow cyclists to bypass a bus when it's stopped on the corridor. And then lastly, we look to moderate or keep the volume of buses as low as possible, and certainly below the threshold or at the threshold defined through national guidance. So not sure if anyone wants to add on to that, but that's really how we look at designing the facilities and making sure that the two modes can operate well together.
Well, I brought you into the conversation in case this discussion leads to more questions. And so if you're watching, use the Q&A, ask us more questions about this, because again, we're going to walk through in more detail in a moment about how that option lane can include bikes and bus or bike only, and the pros and cons of that approach. So certainly safety is one of those factors. And thank you, Caitlin, for talking about that. I see several hands up, so I want to go ahead and take them in the order they were arranged. So Andrew Pyle, if you unmute yourself, you can be live on the air.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you, Project Connect, for hosting this meeting, and thank you for improving our public transportation in this wonderful city. My question is, since the last meeting on the drag, what have y'all considered regards to green space and to art space?
Thanks. I think you bring up an important point, Andrew, that I think Peter can address, talking about this project as a provider of public place.
Yeah, so great question, Andrew. So one of I think the key features of the design progression that we sought to incorporate is the continuous row street trees on the west side of the street. And again, with a lot of the questions that have been asked, lots of needs and desires on this one place, and so we're trying to squeeze as much of this into the real estate of the street that we have available. So right now, I think the thinking with the new proposal, and again, we'll get into this in more detail, is we've got a lot of trees on the east side of the street on the campus already. So let's leverage those by really focusing the green space and the trees on the west side adjacent to the retail, so we can get some shade over there. In terms of art spaces, honestly, that has not really advanced much since the last discussion. I think we've got plenty of time to work on that. Certainly want to make sure that that's part of the what eventually gets built, but we haven't really advanced that much since the last discussion.
Thanks. Let's see, I've got Spencer Schumacher. If you want to unmute yourself, you can be live on the air.
Hey, thank you guys. Love the plan. This is a great improvement and appreciate everything you're doing here. My first question was already kind of touched on, but I'd be curious to know what routes you guys are thinking might use that bus lane. I don't know how far you've gotten into that, because that would change obviously how comfortable a bike rider would be. But my bigger question was, how are you guys accounting for micro mobility traffic? Since scooter parking isn't usually available on the UT side, most people use that west side for scooter parking to go into campus. Are you guys planning for scooter parking areas? Also, are you guys taking micro mobility data into account when creating those figures of throughput?
Thanks for that question, Spencer. And I think, Roberto, if you're able to get in on the mix, that would really help, since Roberto Gonzalez is part of Cap Metro and can talk about that first part of the question, which routes will be in the area. And then I'm not sure who wants to address how are we incorporating micromobility? Roberto?
Sure. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Roberto Gonzalez. I'm with Capital Metro in the planning department. So our team oversees the design of routes and schedules and bus stops. So to Spencer's question, for those of you that are familiar with our service, we run almost 16 routes through the corridor, a combination of local routes, high frequency routes, flyers, expresses, 2 Metro Rapids, 801, 803, and a few university shuttles that either bypass, crossover, or travel along the corridor. As we go through the process in the coming years, we're going to be working with the community to see how those routes change, but we would envision some routes such as Route 1, which would mimic the orange line, would be an example of a route that would stay in the corridor. You would see Route 1, Route 3, Route 7, a few expresses that still would maintain service from different parts of our community serving the corridor. And then we'll see how things develop in the future. But you may not see the full complement of services that you're accustomed to seeing today, but you would see a retainment of some of those routes in that area to maintain service to different parts of our community and connect with Orange Line there.
And Roberto, is there going to be a process to review the routes once it comes on? Because I'm imagining, some people who are, let's say, using the 1 or the 3 or the 801 and the 803 may actually be on the Orange Line by the time they come to the drag. So just as an example.
Yeah. I mean, we're still several years out from making those exact changes. But for those of you that may be familiar with Capital Metro, we make regular schedule changes 3 times a year, every January, summer, and fall, to coincide with changes in traffic patterns. And as we get closer to the date of starting up the light rail system, we will be making a series of recommendations and proposals to the public, bringing them forth widespread to our community, bringing them forth to our board of directors, soliciting input and answers from folks, and just listening to what people have to say about how we might see the system evolve and change from what you see today to the future. So that will be coming, and it's part of our regular normal process that we follow to this date in this area.
Thanks, Roberto. And Peter, I'm not sure if you have an opinion about who can answer that question about micro mobility. Maybe there's someone.
I mean, I wish I had an answer about micro. That's the toughest question out there in mobility right now. Also, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what a micro mobility looks like in 5 years. I think that certainly having a dedicated lane that's not on the sidewalk for for bicycles and other micro mobility forms, I think there's definitely opportunity there. In terms of parking of vehicles, I mean, we have some ideas about how that tree zone could be used for street furniture, and we could probably accommodate some certainly bike parking and metro bike, and maybe some micro mobility sort of docking there if that becomes a thing. So I think there's some opportunities, but honestly, like that's a detail that I think is certainly going to need more study, and certainly as that form of transportation evolves in the next 5 years.
The comment's been noted here in tonight's meeting, and certainly as we move into 60% in the future, we'll be talking about specifics like what will that street environment look like. So I would encourage you to make sure and hold us to it that it will certainly be part of our future design and rollout. Let's see, I'm seeing all the Q&A questions and I'm tempted, but I also see so many hands up. So I'm gonna go ahead and allow Tristan Heinen to join in the conversation. If you unmute, you'll be live on the air.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the interesting presentation so far. Just wanted to say, I feel like it seems like both of the bus options are kind of a trade-off for, the shared bus bike lane is, not going to be a very comfortable bike facility. I've used the one on 5th Street and it's, better than nothing, but it's not a great facility. And then it seems like putting the bus in with the trains would limit the capacity of the trains at some point down the line. So I'm just kind of curious why that kind of original option 2 was eliminated versus, routing the buses through West Campus or on the, dedicated bus lanes on like the east side of campus that'll be coming in with Metro Rapids over there. Just because I feel like the 2 options now are, good in a lot of ways, but also introduce trade-offs for the bikes and for the trains eventually.
Thanks for that, Tristan. You're right. Everything is a trade-off, and it feels like we might want some support. I'm like Peter. I know you want to answer, but also, some folks from the city of Austin may want to weigh in on that as well. I'm not sure if Caitlin or Lee want to join in on this conversation and kind of talk about why we're looking at options B, C, and versus option A at this point, and the incorporation of buses on the drag versus elsewhere.
And Lonnie, this is Roberto again. I can try to answer a few portions of that. So
make it a tri-party answer. I love it. That's the way this is.
Well, the gentleman asked a good question. As
the crux of the matter. So yeah,
as he sees today, as some folks may realize today, the drag is an important part of our network for various modes. I mean, for our bus system, it is probably one of the largest attractors. The drag is one of the largest attractors for our system. We have probably some of the highest ridership in some of these bus stops in and around that vicinity. We believe that light rail and bus would work in unison to provide service to the area. So we see the value of bringing students and other folks to and from that area via both modes. So that's why we're looking at those options. But you're right, there are trade-offs to be reviewed. We'll be looking at these items more intently with engineering reviews and some modeling and how both modes can operate. There are systems around the United States and other parts of the world that do and can operate jointly, and we'll be taking a look at those peers to see how they do things. And we have already spoken to some of those, and some of us around in these calls have visited communities in and around either this country or around the world to see some things like this. So these are the things that we're reviewing, and we'll be coming back to the public later on with some more information as we continue forward with this project.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is it's a both and, right? So I think that we are gonna, I mean, I don't want to speak for Roberto, but looking at, which routes want to be maybe on the east side of campus, right? Because we know that the sort of routing, some of the routing will change for buses. But I think that, the question is, what is the optimal sharing that we should have in the future, right? And I think that's something that we're starting to model and starting to study, in terms of how do buses and trains, light rail function together versus buses and bikes. And again, we have to create the optimal condition for all modes. I think one of the reasons why we are where we are with this configuration is that it does give us that flexibility over time to study this further and to really to make sure that we are optimizing the corridor for all modes. So that's kind of the approach. But I think you recognize that, you know, there's going to have to be some sharing involved. And the question is, what's the best sharing to have?
And Caitlin, do you want to have the last word?
I appreciate the responses from Roberto and Peter. I think they really covered it. I think all three agencies are really committed to making sure that this design is safe and successful. And as we all mentioned, we're looking at peers across the nation and doing our due diligence with our analysis to understand what are the trade-offs. And then of course, hearing from you in the community to understand your feedback so that we can ultimately continue to move this forward in the best way possible.
So don't go anywhere. And actually, Roberto, you should come on back because I think related to this issue is San Antonio and Nueces streets. And there's some back and forth going on here about traffic on those streets. And it sounds like we as a team have been going back and forth with, should we send cars in that area or should we send buses into that area? And so how did we wind up where we are now with the proposal?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned just now, I mean, the corridor, the Guadalupe corridor is an important piece of our system. I mean, we have a number of folks who take advantage of 801, 803, Route 1, our expresses and flyers to get to and from the West Campus, I mean, not the West Campus, but the West Mall area. And so we believe that the most efficient way to continue to deliver folks through the various modes would be to continue in the Guadalupe area. As we looked at options to migrate buses further west from there, that's just not where people are traveling to. People are traveling to the West Mall area. So the further we go away from that, the more it detracts folks from being able to take advantage of the service and find that as a viable option to get to and from that part of the community. So we find it valuable and we find it to be more efficient for our operations.
So it's like there's a benefit to keeping the transit where it is versus pushing it too far to one side or the other.
Yeah, I mean, based on what we know and see today and what we believe will continue in the future of people needing to reach key destinations there on the main campus.
Thanks for that, Roberto. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and recognize another person who's been waiting very patiently. Travis Simmons, if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and be live on the air.
Hi, first of all, I just want to voice my support for a car-free Guad. I'm a student, I live in West Campus. I don't drive down Guad, I don't know many people do. For us students, it's mostly something to walk up, down, or across, and it'd be much better without cars, I think. And I also just want to ask about, like if there were no vehicular lanes on Guad, where the buses would go, but you guys just kind of touched on that. So I guess that's all I really had to say. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you for your involvement and for participating. We're getting to a stopping point here where we're going to move on. So I can probably take Carl. I'm going to allow you to talk, and I might get to Kathleen. But Carl, before you unmute, anybody else who has their hand up, if you want to keep your hand up, it can stay up and you'll still be in line. But I just am warning you, we're going to run to the end of the Q&A period for this section. But Carl, you should be live on the air.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So we were told that we could come on this webinar and voice our considerable distaste for destroying Dirty Martins. I am an Austin native. I grew up there in the 60s. I witnessed the Charles Whitman shooting. My father was a teacher on the campus. Dirty Martins was a mecca of culture and history for many, many Austinites. And to even mention that some other businesses have been relocated is insulting. It is a historic old location. Janis Joplin hung out there. There are all sorts of people hang out there, and there are ugly new apartment buildings that have sprouted up everywhere, all over that neighborhood, and none of them seem to be an option for removing as opposed to dirty Martins. I really don't think people on this panel understand the impact that's going on in Austin, removing ostentatious, really Austin flavor history for the purpose of somehow thinking they're going to reduce traffic or help with transportation. It's just insensitive and really, really troubling to people personally that enjoy some of these old historic institutions in Austin. And I think you really are going to have to expect quite a protest about this. It's not going to go down easy. Really would like some straightforward answers on why the plan cannot go around Dirties and destroy something on the other side. Like there's Torchy's, there's an apartment complex over there, there's a smoke shop, nothing of real historic cultural value towards Austin. And yet you want to destroy Dirty Martins. I'm really, really flabbergasted. I'm sorry to be so frustrated, but I think a lot of people share my opinion. It just may not have been made obvious enough to the panel.
Well, thanks, Carl, for adding that. I'm sure you speak for many people, just like every person who gets on the mic during these meetings. They represent not just their own opinion, but also the opinions of many other people who are there. I think earlier in the discussion, we really covered the necessity of protecting homes for people, especially while we're in a housing crisis. And how that plays out is if you protect one side of the street because of homes, there's an impact on the other side of the street where there are businesses. And I think we've also covered that there's not only a process for paying landowners that may be directly impacted by the project, but also working with business owners and operators on reestablishment and relocation. I know that doesn't really solve the problem for you or answer that, but at this point, that's where we are. I suppose, Peter, if you have any more to add to it, we should. But again, I want to thank you, Carl, for speaking up, because while we've seen it in the Q&A tonight, we haven't heard it on screen yet. And you know that being on screen matters.
Yeah, I mean, you can relocate apartment complexes easier than an institution, a historic landmark. I mean, that's what Dirties is. It's one specific example of something that cannot be relocated. Antone's is a different story. That was a large music venue, but music venues don't have that kind of history back to the 1930s or 20s that a place like Dirty Martins does. And I still don't understand the homes versus the businesses if the homes are not, or if you were saying that a business can be relocated, the homes can't. There are not any really historical houses on the other side of Dirties. There's nothing but Torchy's and a hideous new apartment complex, and that's it. But the history, if you walk into Dirties and you see the photos on the wall of all this gone down in that building, I think you would maybe rethink your whole attitude about destroying it.
Well, thanks again, Carl. We appreciate it. And I'm glad that you've been here as long as I have, where, you know, those apartments built in the, you know, like 2000 are new to me too. Let's see. I did promise Kathleen, and then I think we're going to move on to the next section. But again, we're going to have another Q&A opportunity after a much deeper dive. So this will be the last question for this section. And Kathleen, you're live on the air if you unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. I am very interested to know what the specific expansion plan is for Nueces. Isis mentioned that in her segment earlier. Do you have any graphics that show what it is, how the traffic is going to be changed, where it's expanded, where it's going? I am looking for specifics.
Isis, did you want to mention that?
Maybe Caitlin, do you want to let Caitlin take that one? I don't know whether we also, got some additional resources available on that, on the Nueces Street project. I don't know whether maybe we can put a link in the chat on those. I don't know. Caitlin, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I actually have a clarifying question. Are you requesting more information about the section of Nueces that I discussed that's being converted two-way north of 24th Street?
Well, I'm asking about the entire thing. If you're expanding Nueces north of 24th, that means you're going to have more traffic on Nueces. Yes? That's what you're anticipating?
So Isis may be able to speak to traffic volumes, but as described earlier, we know that traffic is already growing in West Campus, and there's a need to be able to improve mobility and safety through the area. And so the two-way conversion is really intended in the short term to help address those existing needs. And this was planned before Project Connect. And then it happens to also work with the Project Connect plan to provide additional opportunities for mobility through the West Campus area by providing that two-way travel.
And I'll add to that, Caitlin, and say, so in the portion of Nueces south of 24th, we identified some mitigation that would be needed for both of the options, or one or the other option, but neither of those options is expanding Nueces per se. The mitigation that we are evaluating are more signalized in certain intersections or changing the configuration at an intersection. So I think that will answer your question more specific, maybe.
And
we're not considering widening Nueces anywhere, are we? It's really, we're working within the existing Nueces Street and then optimizing it through signalization and this two-way project that Caitlin described to make it work better.
Right.
The only change is that at the intersection of 24th Street and Nueces and San Antonio, where you have that T, we are proposing to basically connect San Antonio south of 24th Street to Nueces north of 24th Street, so that is more of a continuous corridor, and that again will help to alleviate some of the traffic impacts.
Well, so hopefully we'll be covering this in some more detail here. Certainly you can always write to us, and I'm going to just again put this email in the chat, feedback@capmetro.org, and make a request there, and we may be able to give you more detail than we can on Zoom tonight. At this point, again, I'm apologizing to Lyndon and Janice who are in the wings. You can keep your hands up, but I wanted to turn the conversation back over to that deeper dive that we promised, and then we'll come back for Q&A. So let's see, Bill, you've got some slides. Let's get back to where we were. And then I think, Peter, you're going to walk us through the thanks.
Yeah, I'll walk you through the sort of the updated design. Yeah, great. Thanks, Bill. So just overall, globally, we're looking at option C, right? So with this two different scenarios for how to use that lane that's in between the sidewalk and the light rail guideway. So again, in this scenario, scenario one, right, you've basically got the shared bus bikeway operation, right, in that pink lane. And so you'll see that the pink kind of coming throughout the drawings, and we'll get into more detail in a couple of slides. So you can see basically in this option, the buses would come up from the south in a sharing with traffic up to 21st Street, and then can merge into this the pink shared lane. In both scenarios, we're looking at 3 sets of bus stops in the corridor. One set centered around 21st Street, one set just north of the light rail station between 23rd and 24th, and then one north of 27th. Again, connecting close to the light rail stops, so that's good for transfers, putting them where we have space to have adequate places for the bus to stop, and so other traffic to move past, and other modes to move past, whether in both options. And then also just enough space on the sidewalk to handle shelters, et cetera. So, and I'll get into the detail of that. Go to the next. And in this option, scenario one, again, with the shared lane, we've got both some local precedents and then also these NACTO standards that Caitlin cited earlier that help to inform how we can make this work. And again, this works really based on making sure that the bus operations, are infrequent enough so that bikes have the room and the ability to move as they need to as well. Let's go to the next. So scenario C2, again, this is where the buses would share the light rail guideway. So, and then the green represents a dedicated bike and micromobility lane, separate from where the buses would travel. When we get to 27th Street, between 27th and 29th, in both scenarios, there is a dedicated bus lane. So at that point, everybody's got their own lane. But between 22nd and 27th Street, there is the sharing in both scenarios. Next. And looking at precedents for shared bus LRT, there are some national examples where this is done. Portland, throughout their transit mall downtown, the buses and the light rail are sharing a lane. And then in Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota, the Washington Avenue project, they actually recently installed a corridor that's free of general purpose vehicular traffic, and there is this shared bus LRT lane. So again, there are places where this has been done. Again, we just have to study how it would work here based on the volumes of and the speed and the frequency of light rail vehicles and bus routes, et cetera. So something that has started, but requires some more study. Next. Okay, so I'm going to just walk you through from south to north, again, how this all works out in some detail. Again, we are working with a pretty constrained space. And so, try to figure out how to squeeze in all these different modes that are really busy in this area. So we're at MLK to 21st Street. This is where the orange line would basically be emerging from the downtown tunnel into the at-grade running section. So you can see basically the trains would come underneath MLK and then they would rise up. And so by the time that you get to 21st, the trains are at grade. In this one block, we've got one lane in each for general purpose traffic in each direction. We also have dedicated bike lanes for most of it. Interesting little twist on the northbound side, so the east side of the street. We obviously there's a bike lane coming up Lavaca, and so looking at how that lane on Lavaca could transition to Guadalupe, we think that there's a route that maybe goes behind Rowling Hall and then connects on 20th Street and then connects to Guadalupe. Also, we've got some driveways that we do have to accommodate for the Dobie, et cetera. So we figured out how to squeeze that in. And then there was a bus stop. You can see that on the east side of the street, the west side of the street, just south of 21st Street. Go to the next, please. Okay, so this is where we have this sort of optionality, operational with two operational scenarios. Again, the bus stops, which are located in that kind of darker red, are in the same location in both. And you can see with that dotted red line, the different ways essentially that the buses would travel through the corridor. And that's kind of the main difference, right? So in the top one, the buses again are sharing the bike lane with bikes. You can see how they share that pink lane. And then the bottom, they're sharing the LRT guideway. And so that's why the green lane is the dedicated separated bike and micromobility lane. Everything else basically stays the same, right? There are some micro changes, sort of very localized changes. So if you look at, for example, the intersection of 24th Street, where the bus stop is, right? In the shared bus bike scenario, the top one, basically we'll have a space to allow bikes to move past on the left side of the bus stop, right? And you can see, so the bus pulls over to the right, there's a shelter there, and the bikes move past on the left. And the bottom one, where bikes have their own bike lane, the bikes essentially go behind the shelter. And so again, these are details, but we've really tried to work through the whole system to see how all these different modes could fit and work together. In both scenarios, we have the light rail station as a center platform that is basically between 22nd and 23rd. So I think the pedestrian movements right now, which, you know, a lot of which cross at West Mall, those will shift a little bit. I think 23rd Street, where it connects to that pedestrian zone on the west side of the street, will become a really major pedestrian crossing. 24th Street already is a major pedestrian crossing, will continue to be so. So I think there will be some adjustments to how peds move through this, but again, lots of connectivity and this, you know, around the different transit modes. Let's go to the next. So some people asked in the chat, so why, you know, why can it be different once we get past the station? Obviously the station, we need more width for the light rail. And I think, so one of the things you can see is that once we get north of 24th Street, the roadway actually shrinks down, right? It's by about, I think it's, you know, 16 feet or something to come out of the roadway. So that's, you know, we're taking advantage of one of those, go back one. One of the reasons why we locate the station in the wide section is because that's where we've got the most room, right? And so we take advantage of that. When we get north of 24th Street, you know, things get a little tighter. And so we really just have the room for that, you know, sidewalk on both sides of the street trees on the west side of the street, that option lane, and then the light rail guideway in the middle. And that goes all the way from 24th to 27th Streets. Gotten some questions about servicing to the buildings on the west side of the street. If we take out general purpose traffic, you know, there is a continuous alley for much of this. And then I think when you get to the north, there are some places where the alley ends. And so I think we figured out how we can manage access from the cross streets in that location. So I think we've got that solved, but maybe we have to go back into that in more detail. Go to the next. And then, you know, north of 27th Street, 27th to 29th, you know, this is where the roadway gets even narrower. And this is where we have that conflict with, you know, the site that's, you know, with the Dirty Martin site. And you can see how, you know, we're doing some pretty significant reconfiguration of the intersection at 29th Street to, again, to rationalize all these different modes. You know, right now that intersection is really hard to navigate as a pedestrian, right? It's kind of, you got this five-way intersection and it's really tough. And so part of what we're trying to do is actually make it a little bit more normal with a four-way. Obviously we've got, you know, to make sure that the light rail has, you know, enough sort of generous enough radii so that it can make that turn. And also we're trying to accommodate all the other modes, bikes and buses, et cetera. But you can see here how southbound vehicular traffic coming from the right, you know, could transition to Nueces Street in this location or go right and left on 29th Street when we transition to the transit mall. But we do have in this area, we have dedicated bus lane and dedicated bike lanes in this area so that we can provide that facility. Next. So again, just to summarize, you know, again, we've got two different scenarios for how to use the same configuration. You know, part of the reason why we think this is a good direction to go in is because it does give us that flexibility to really study this further in terms of what is most optimal in terms of operation for all modes. And so we'll continue to work on that as we go forward. Next. So just now we got some updated renderings to show what that would look and feel like. And so we'll just walk through those quickly and you get a sense of how it compares to the existing. So this is a view looking north on the west side of the street, obviously, you know, at about the West Mall of the campus. This is existing. You can see, look at all the different modes are on display in many ways between Metro Bike and the bike lane and scooters and pedestrians and obviously in this case cars, etc. So go to the next. So this is a rendering from the same view, and you can see, you know, the sidewalk separated from that option lane by the row of trees, and then in this case we're showing a bus actually in the LRT guideway in the background. You can see that between the bike lane and then the platform for the light rail. One thing to note, remember, is that the light rail platforms, you know, they're not like the commuter rail platforms. They're only about 14 inches above the track. So, this should be a fairly sort of seamless, visually seamless environment. And so we have the center platform with, canopies. Again, this is kind of a placeholder design. Design of those will come later. And you can see the light rail train on the northbound light rail train on the east side of the platform. Go to the next. So existing view, same general location, but looking, taken from the east side of the street, looking west. Here you can see how narrow that sidewalk is on the east side, and how we can hopefully improve how that works. Go to the next. So you get a sense of how we can start to make the whole space for all these different modes feel a little bit more generous and more spacious. And really, I think this also the station becomes a kind of part of the gateway to the campus, which we think is a real opportunity. Let's go to the next. So this is a view from about 23rd Street, again, looking south. You can see the existing bus stop. And again, sort of a lot of things that have to get accommodated. Go to the next. And then you can see how we've got the sidewalk zone next to the retail, really generous. I think that tree and furniture zone opportunities for various types of street furniture, whether signage or trash cans or bike parking, etc. We've got the option lane, and then the light rail guideway, and then the light rail platform. Now you can see there's some indicators about how these different lanes would be separated, with these different paving patterns, and you can see those little white squares. Those represents lights in the pavement that could announce, the arrival of the train when it comes. I think there are lots of details to be refined here over time that will really make this work, really optimally and also kind of beautifully. And so, I think we've got lots of future development to come in terms of the design going forward. I think that's it. Next. Yeah. So that's more of, how this new configuration or updated configuration works, and look forward to taking more questions.
Well, great. Thanks again, Peter, for the walkthrough, especially some of those overhead views. So, Bill, I know that you're excited because we got to the end of the deck, but I would just keep it close. We may need to refer to some of those street sections again. And I see a large queue of hands up. Let's see, we were planning to end at 7. We probably are going to have more questions, and so probably 7:15 is our target for closing tonight. So just keep that in mind. And I had an interesting question here from Cam before we open to hands raised. I guess Peter, you might want to weigh in. I'm not sure again if Roberto wants to talk to this, or Caitlin as well. This is a question about what would be the advantage of putting bikes and buses together versus buses and light rail together? Is it cheaper? Is it safer? Is it faster? Like, what is the benefits of one separation type versus the other?
So I can start. Maybe I think others can chime in. Roberto and Caitlin. Some of this just has to do with scheduling, right? And looking at sort of how these vehicles move and the frequency with which they're moving, arriving, and how those movements are timed with signals, right, for pedestrian movements, right? So, one of the things is if the buses and the light rail are sharing a guideway, and again, I'm gonna explain this as a layperson. I'm not a traffic engineer, so if I get this wrong, the traffic engineers will come in and save me. But I think the issue is that if light rail and buses are sharing the guideway, there's the possibility you can get kind of these modes backed up, right? Depending on how the timing works and how it works with the signaling. Again, may or may not be an issue. We may be able to figure out how to time all that so it works perfectly. And they can share the guideway. Again, we haven't done all the modeling yet to understand that, and there's just more work to do there. So that would be the advantage of having the buses separated, is that those transit modes have a little bit more operational independence and flexibility.
All right, so that's ATP's point of view. I'm wondering about Cap Metro and the city of Austin, if you have a different perspective about the pros and cons of different mode sharing.
No, I mean, our perspectives are all in unison in this. There's not an ATP, Capital Metro City of Austin. It's a shared kind of perspective in that area, trying to look at the limited right of way in that corridor and trying to maximize the person throughput in a thoughtful, safe way in that area. We have examples in our community where we share bus bike. We heard from one of our guests tonight. He doesn't feel comfortable with that. That we totally get. We don't want to create a situation that we can avoid, but there are limitations into this area. And these are instances that occur, like I mentioned before, throughout our community, throughout our country, around the world, where we're in limited spaces. You have to look at these opportunities. And so, as Peter mentioned, we're going to continue to model this and work with experts who do this on a regular basis to evaluate, what's the best way to look at these kinds of things. And there will be some trade-offs that we'll have to bring back to the community and say, these are the kind of things that we found and what are the things that we're willing to look at as we continue forward. But there's not a final design. That's why Peter and the rest of the group we presented kind of the options, and this is where we stand at this point. And this is how we'll continue to evaluate this as we move forward.
And Caitlin, again, this question is like, what is the benefit of bus bike? Bus bike versus bus rail. I mean, you got people in the audience, they want to give you their feedback, but they don't have the whole picture. So, are there benefits to one versus the other, or could you give me a reason for it on both options so that you can help people out there make a decision?
I just would reiterate what Peter and Roberto have said. There's benefits to both options and there's trade-offs with both options. So with the shared bus and bike lane, we're going to have to look at the design closely and see, how many buses do we anticipate operating on that corridor? How can we design it safely and efficiently so that buses and cyclists are operating together comfortably? And as we've described, we have experience with that here in Austin, and we of course look to our peers to see best practice and how we can continue to improve with that. And there will be a lot that we can do, and there will be limits in terms of how much bus service we can operate in a shared bus and bike lane, because of course we want to ensure that we're keeping our cyclists in mind and really looking to their safety and comfort first. And similarly with the shared bus and LRT guideway, we will look closely at what are, first we want to prioritize LRT through the corridor and make sure that we are operating this investment as efficiently as possible so that we can continue to maximize person throughput. And so we will look closely at the model and to have an understanding of how many buses could we operate on that shared guideway to ensure that both modes can operate together efficiently. And just like with the other scenario, there will be designs that we look to across the country to make sure that we are doing that safely and efficiently and effectively. And there will be limits. At some point, we will say we cannot operate more than this many buses on the guideway before we start to impact LRT operations. And we don't want to do that. So we're going to limit it at a certain amount. So, it's not a satisfying answer because there's not a clear winner. They both have, benefits, and they both have challenges that we have to work through. But I think we feel confident that we can do that. And we've, seen it done elsewhere and think it's an option here in Austin.
Well, I think that's a fair point, Caitlin. I mean, the reason we're coming to the public at this point, looking at the two different options, is because there are good arguments for and against both sides. And so it'd be worthwhile to know more about that. And as people come to the mic, it'd be helpful to weigh in on that. Because again, this choice between those is really the heart of the matter as we move forward onto the 30% design. But with that in mind, I'd like to open the mics and see what comes out. It may not be about this issue, we'll see. But let's start with Lyndon Henry. You can unmute, and if you do, you'll be live on the air. Hello, Lyndon, are you there? Are you there? Well, I see you're on. We can't hear you. So I'm gonna stop for this moment. The next speaker, while Lyndon, you work on your technical difficulties on your end. I'll try to come back to you again. Janice, I've got you here if you want to unmute.
I would like to ask if you have a report or a study showing the number of properties that would need to be condemned through eminent domain and how much that would be a cost to the ATP or city or Cap Metro, as the case may be, to allow this, either any of these plans to go forward. Do you have a report or a list or anything that would show the addresses of the properties and the cost to the city for that condemnation?
So I think as part of the 30% design and the environmental impact statement, we will document all the properties that we think we will need to acquire through this process to make the alignment work, right? And then we'll get feedback on that. That's part of the process. I don't know if we'll have a cost for that as part of this process. There is a whole process to get to that cost. You have to do appraisals, et cetera, and then hopefully you can negotiate with property owners. So there's a whole process that's regulated to come to that. So I don't know when that number will be available. But certainly the identification of the properties that we think we would have to be required to acquire as part of this process will be identified as part of the 30% documents in the EIS.
Thanks for that, Peter. Let's see, Lyndon, I'm going to try again to allow you to speak. If you unmute, you might give it a try again.
Can you hear me yet? Hello?
We can hear you now.
But now we cannot.
All right, Lyndon, I'm sorry that it's not working. I'm gonna pull you down again. It sounded like you were calling from the distant future. So we're gonna move on to Diane. So Diane, you're live on the air.
Oh, hi, thank you. I understand the concept behind wanting to take Nueces, straighten it out to San Antonio and take it all the way to MLK. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but one of the things that has come up for me recently as I'm watching the traffic on MLK is that you've already got traffic lights there at Rio Grande, at Nueces, and right where our alley from our garage comes out and connects to Nueces, there's a light there. So what are you planning to then, so if you're gonna do this and make San Antonio two-way and that becomes kind of the de facto throughway, with the traffic that is coming from the hotel, that on game days, graduation, major events that the hotel has, major events that we as a church have in our garage right there on that corner, right? Then across the street, you have a Chick-fil-A, which is the busiest Chick-fil-A in the nation, I understand. And just watch it on a weekday between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. And there's the manager out there directing traffic in and out of his Chick-fil-A. And then you've got P. Terry's on top of that, people trying to turn left into P. Terry's at a light that also is Nueces going through into downtown. So that whole intersection is a nightmare to begin with. And so what are the plans for moving the lights around, redirecting traffic? What do we do in terms of how we direct our school families when we get our new school built? What does the hotel do directing their traffic coming in and out if you're making that a two-way intersection? I just don't understand. I haven't seen anything. Everybody's talking about Nueces and north of 24th Street, but nobody has presented anything to say how you're going to address the traffic that will be at that intersection. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Diane. And I see, Isis, you've come on because you've been working on that traffic plan there. And I think it's important to just insert into that question, you know, we're not just talking about the car traffic coming through that intersection, but also there are people who are walking and trying to bike in this area as well as transit.
Yes, and I think I want to answer the second part of the question, because I think that most of this question was asking about the intersection of MLK and San Antonio, which is where there's a Chick-fil-A and all of those businesses and the hotel.
There are visual aid in the presentation tonight that can show that, or do you have anything that you can put up?
Yes,
so it's
if
getting
you go to slide 36, I think that will give us a little bit more answers. And in that table, we can see that we're proposing a mitigation on MLK and San Antonio. That mitigation at this particular intersection, you know, mitigations throughout, it's either signalization or lane reconfiguration that work best for the traffic that is being rerouted. And this is one of those intersections where we're proposing mitigation to help with the many users that will be here on for the hotel and for the businesses, and then on MLK traveling east-west. So that's a mitigation that we're proposing at that particular location.
Yeah, but Diane, I think I mean, you've identified some of the factors. If you look at the numbers, right, that intersection at MLK and San Antonio is one of the ones that's the most challenging. It's actually so yeah, I think you've correctly identified that as one of the tough spots in the network, and so we're going to have to continue to keep looking at that. I see Lee came on. Lee, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lee Austin, the Central Traffic Engineer for the City of Austin. And one thing I don't think we've quite covered is the fact that this two-way conversion of Nueces to San Antonio will not replace Guadalupe as it is today. And that's not the intended purpose. It won't be all that convenient to use Guadalupe or use Nueces to San Antonio as a through route. That traffic we expect to reroute to other arterials like Lamar, like 35, like Mopac. We know there's not tons of capacity there, but they will be much more convenient through routes. The traffic you'll see in
Lee, you muted yourself.
Lee, yeah. There you go.
I have no idea how I did that. The traffic that you see going to West Campus using Nueces to San Antonio will most likely be people going to West Campus. The people that today you would come down to Guadalupe and turn on 24th and cut over to get to your condos, now you would use Nueces. And we'll smooth out the curve a little bit there at Nueces and San Antonio, because I'm sure everybody in West Campus is aware, Nueces is southbound, you got that weird dog leg to continue on south. San Antonio T's, and it's a weird dog leg to get further north. We're going to smooth that out to make it a little bit more convenient West Campus, but we don't expect Nueces and San Antonio to completely replace the existing commuter traffic that's using Guadalupe. We hope some of them use a train, some of them will use other routes, but that's kind of the intent of how we're designing this. And definitely the school and the churches there are in the forefront of our design. That's something I've been mentioning every step of the way, that we have to take you guys into account, because that's an existing use that will continue, and it's an important part of Austin. So.
You know, and Lee, while we have you here, I think it's kind of related to this, and you know, Isis may want to weigh in as well. But there were some questions about how will emergency vehicles access this area? How will deliveries be made in this area? And I thought you might want to talk about how the plan has responded to that need versus maybe the first version.
Well, we're still have to work with all the local businesses, because that's also hugely important that we supply our businesses and keep them operational. We have the alleyway, which right now is not super convenient for large trucks because it's difficult to get through there. That's an alternative. I also know the alleyway is also used by the schools, so that's an important consideration. We have San Antonio and Nueces as delivery areas as well, particularly San Antonio and north of 24th would be a good area for a lot of deliveries. It's definitely we're going to have to work through with the businesses, because that's getting freight deliveries is a hugely important part of keeping them operational.
And to add to that, we are working with the Austin Fire Department as well to try to make sure that even with these changes, emergency vehicles will still have access to where they need to go.
Thanks for that, Isis. Let's see, let's try Lyndon one more time. And then after that, we're just gonna chalk it up to technology. So Lyndon, if you unmute, you could be live on mute. All right, Lyndon, I'm sorry it's not going to work out tonight, but the good thing is I know how to reach you, and you certainly have appeared at several of these meetings. So I'm going to slide down to Carl and allow you to talk. And if you unmute yourself, you can be live on the air.
Hi, not to beat a dead horse, but I just was looking at the plan that Peter presented in that segment on Guadalupe where Dirty Martin's is. And to me, it looks like the only thing taking over that property is the trees. Is that the case? I mean, is there any kind of other option? Yeah. I mean, I would hate for Dirty's to be torn down because you want to plant trees there. I mean,
yeah, no, I would 100% agree with that. So, and Isis, you can help me out here. So the site that's actually the triangular site here is the site of, that's where the Whataburger is, right? So the Dirty Martin's is actually north of that, right? And so the entire guideway itself for the light rail is kind of, again, is impacting that directly. So so it's not just the trees. I mean, even I think we looked at, even if we necked down we had shared everything, right, between buses, bikes. I mean, you can't share with pets, obviously, but no trees. Even if we necked all of that down to the absolute minimum, right, I think we still are impacting Dirty Martin's, unfortunately.
Yeah, so this is the most constrained that the right-of-way is. This is, I think, about 50 feet at the narrowest, and just the track by itself, the guideway by itself, needs 28 feet. So if you can imagine, we played with this for a long time. We were trying to be as creative as possible to try to reduce those right-of-way impacts, and there was no way that we could avoid impacts to the west if the orange line was going to pass through here. So because we are already impacting the buildings, then the approach is, then let's show the optimum cross section as defined by the city standards. And so that's what you're seeing right now is separate bike and pet facilities and trees. But if we eliminate everything, we were still impacting right-of-way impacts.
And thanks for bringing this up. I just thought we can have one more discussion there from Carlos, having seen the second half. But again, in the Q&A document, you can see that there's a link to a previous conversation that we hosted with the North Guadalupe Working Group. And we went into a lot of detail about how that particular intersection at 29th and Guadalupe would be impacted by the plan. And I'd recommend that you take a look at that as well for more context. It looks like we're down to a final question as we're getting to the end of the night. I'm going to pick Joel. I'm not sure if it's Joel or Joelle. Maybe you can let us know when you unmute because you'll be live on the air.
It's Joelle. Thank you so much. And I wanted to say that I look forward to having these meetings actually in person. And I do appreciate all the comments in the Q&A to get everyone else's perspective, especially everyone who is very familiar, who has skin in the game in West Campus, who are advocating for Dirty Martin's. And again, piggybacking on what Diane said, that is going to be a huge challenge to navigate MLK at San Antonio. I understand what your speaker was saying in terms of you all are hopeful that the traffic that comes off of Guadalupe will not now come Nueces to San Antonio, that people would take other alternative routes instead of bringing all that traffic into the community. But in terms of that location, as Diane mentioned, you have people pulling off of MLK in a very, very already busy street. You have the hotel check-in valet right at that corner. Just past that is St. Austin's for the school pickup line. Then you have the new high rise of all the residents that are going to live there. The UAP, the University Area Partners, also will be impacted because the parking benefit district will obviously be affected because there won't be parking on a lot of these streets. So that's where my comments come in. I am very interested in not only seeing the traffic studies, especially during move in and move out peak times. I would like for the UAP and members of our group to see what your SEPTED plans are. We would like, obviously, you have a lot of trees planted, which are lovely. I always sarcastically joke about your renderings are the best part of this whole project. But let's be real, if you have gone to West Campus, you see the graffiti, the weeds, the feces, the needles. There's a lot happening over there. There is no crime prevention through environmental design. For those who don't know what SEPTED is, who is going to maintain those trees? I would love to see halo cameras, blue light call boxes. This is an area that has issues. So what are you going to do? The natural surveillance component. If you're not maintaining those trees, then there's that visibility component. Are people going to be able to see as they navigate down the drag 25 feet in front of them and behind them? It's a serious issue. And let's be honest, a lot of the crime is happening in the middle of the day. So don't just assume that it's night. Right now, we are finally just getting lighting to meet standard in the West Campus area because it's never met standard. So Austin Energy is working closely with us to make that happen. So my big concerns are, what are your SEPTED plans? Are they going to be uniformly throughout the neighborhood? Because I feel like you are going to be responsible for SEPTED because you're moving that traffic into the neighborhood. So what are the traffic calming? What's going to happen in those areas? What are the bollards that you're going to put up? Some of those planters, just so you know, they're not permanent bollards. If a big truck, box truck, which is a concern for campus big threats, those are not in there stationary. So we need to look at what the actual safety plan is, especially for that population. We'd like to know what the SEPTED plans are. We would like to see them. We would like to know who is going to be responsible for maintaining them, because you can come in and make all those renderings and make it look all fancy and nice, like you're saying, but who's going to maintain it? Because if you go over there right now, it is the perfect model of the broken windows theory. There's no SEPTED. There's no one taking care of it and maintaining the area. And so I hope that you all will do that. I appreciate you all coming to our UAP meetings. We do all have a lot of concerns. We do wish that Dirty Martins wasn't going to be axed, that you had a better option for that, but we still have a lot of questions, and I hope that you will meet with us in person. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joelle, for sharing that. There was a lot to unpack there, and I know that there is a security team that does work with Cap Metro on facilities, and so we will be bringing them into the conversation as we move into further into the design plans. I'm not sure, Peter, if there was anything in particular that you wanted to address there.
No, I mean, these are all great questions, I think a lot of which we don't have the answers for yet, right? And so, but these are important things. I'm really glad you raised them, and things that we need to make sure that we put on our list that we've got to address going forward. So,
well, again, I want to thank everybody for putting questions in the Q&A. There's a huge team that are working through those questions, and we've been trying to publish them live or answer them live tonight. If we haven't, we are pulling those questions, and there will be a summary report of this meeting that will get posted on the Project Connect website. You can always go to the public engagement library and see all of the PowerPoints, the videos, and summary reports there for this project. Now, before we go this evening, there is one person in particular we wanted to thank, and she doesn't know we're doing this, so I apologize in advance for taking you by surprise. But Jackie Nierenberg has been the Director of Community Engagement and Community Involvement. I've gotten to work by her side over the past 6 years, and this meeting is her last public meeting with the Austin Transit Partnership. You'll probably see her in another capacity in our community, but she will be leaving the Austin Transit Partnership, and we wanted to just take a moment to say thank you for your service, and thank you for being such a great mentor and boss and colleague, friend. And for many of you in the audience, you may also similarly have feelings like this for Jackie, but we love you and we're going to miss you, and we wanted to take a moment just to recognize you for that.
Thank you, Lottie. Greatly appreciate it. It's been an amazing ride. I know we're going to do great things with the community, and I want to thank our community members for continuing to be involved in this transformative program. We can't do it without you. We appreciate your comments, your concerns, your questions. Thanks for coming along on the ride.
Well, thanks again, Jackie. And Bill, I think you might have one last slide to take us out. So just a reminder generally that we would encourage you to stay involved. You got involved today with the drag. We have one more public meeting coming up on June 22nd at 5:30. That's our subway stations overview. We'll talk about all the stations we're considering for placing underground and what may or may not be included with them. But again, please take a moment to visit projectconnect.com/get-involved. Or you can just go to projectconnect.com and click on the red buttons on the top right-hand corner. We'd encourage you to come to future meetings, send us email at feedback@projectconnect.com, or join a working group anywhere the blue or orange line touches your neighborhood. With that, thanks again for your time, and I hope to see you out there.